Welcome, Jonathan Greenblatt, to another of our How conversations. Jonathan, it's a genuine pleasure. And I say this as your friend and as somebody that I know that you know that you know that I know that we are kindred, both in spirit and philosophically. We go back a long way.
Yeah.
Your bio manifests a remarkable journey of not the pursuit of success, but frankly, the pursuit of significance. As a pioneer, you co-founded Ethos Water, just bringing responsible practices to business, so much ahead of when others did that, or so far ahead. Your experiences in for-profit and nonprofit and both the public and private spheres. If I had to sum it up, you've always been on the vanguard, pushing some frontier connected to human progress and making a difference. And most recently, you became the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League. Everybody knows that the ADL is really about a righteous fight for elevating civil rights in society, explicitly fighting anti-Semitism, but equally promoting justice for all. You've been doing it valiantly. You've been doing it in a respectful yet outspoken way, which is part of the calling of what the CEO of the ADL signs up to do. And it's a pleasure and an honor to welcome you. And I want listeners and viewers to know that I'm welcoming you on the occasion of the publication, and I'll use the word I used before, of your significant book.
Thank you.
It could happen here. And the subtitle in and of itself says so much: Why America is Tipping from Hate to the Unthinkable and How We Can Stop It. To the extent your premise is right, which I think day in, day out, we get evidence that it is, stopping it becomes an urgent imperative. Before we jump into the conversation, let's get personal. What's the through line? You're from childhood to today. What's animated your life? What, as you look back, makes it all add up together that brings you to having such a mission as a professional, as a leader?
It's a good question. And I've reflected a lot on this because I think in your very generous and kind introduction, you made the point that my background, doesn't really lend itself to like the typical thumbnail description, where you achieve in one sector or you perform in one particular industry. Like the reality is I've been in, like you said, for-profit, nonprofit, startups, public companies, government, now nonprofit. But the true north for me has always been this desire to change the world. I think in part that inspiration came from my paternal grandfather, who was a Holocaust survivor from Germany, who saw the worst of the worst, who literally had the unthinkable happen to him and his family. And he came to this country with no connections, no family, no money, no language, nothing, having lost it all, and yet was able to kind of forge a middle-class existence in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And when I was a kid, Dov, maybe 7 or 8 years old, I remember he took me to a rally for Soviet Jewry to free the Soviet Jews, which was a big cause in the 70s and 80s. So what was amazing about that for me was that then a few years later, they freed them. They got out. And for me, it's sort of connected that I could be part of something bigger than me. That little old me could do something consequential. And then several years later, when I was a college student and I was a work study student and had lots of loans and was trying to pay for college, and Governor Bill Clinton, who was running, had this idea. He had this idea that young people would work in their communities after school to pay their student loans. And he lifted up these interesting young pioneers like a woman named Wendy Cott, who of course started Teach for America, and these guys named Michael Brown and Alan Casey, who started City Year. And I was mopping floors and like washing dishes and doing the kind of jobs one does. And I thought, wow, that's a much better way to pay for school than what I'm doing. So I ended up volunteering, Dov, as a college student in Boston, and then moving to Little Rock to work for Governor Clinton right after I graduated. And then he won. He got the nomination. I mean, I remember when he picked Al Gore and he got the nomination. And so for me, Dov, those two moments, the movement to free the Soviet Jews and then joining the Clinton for President campaign way back when, like they awakened in me this idea that I could change the world. And that's been my true north ever since. That's been the through line in different fields and different roles. I always felt like that's what I was put here to do.
You obviously put your hat in the ring and raised your hand and said, I'd like to seize the opportunity of leadership to lead the venerated and important ADL. What inspired you to do that?
When they offered me the job, you know what I did actually? I called one of my mentors, who I think is a mutual friend, David Wolpe, who was my rabbi for many years in Los Angeles. I was a member of Sinai Temple. And I said, Rabbi Wolpe, like, I don't know what to do. They offered me the job. Like, I'm pretty stunned. I don't know what to do or to say. And Rabbi Wolpe, I'm not going to quote him, but he basically said, look, like, this is a call to service. But this is a call to service, not just like serving the taxpayers as your shareholders as you've done, or serving taxpayers as you're doing, but serving the Jewish people. And is there a higher calling than that? And, you know, he was very sage as he is, and really left me with the belief that indeed this is a call to service.
What is your playbook for what to engage with, how to engage, how to enlist others? Just take us into your world, because it's at the center of, in fact, your duty.
We do 5-year plans at ADL. I did my first strategic plan when I started in 2015. People were like, whoa, this isn't something we do. I said, actually, it is now. So my first 5-year plan was I brought in a group called Bridge Span to help me think it through. We did something called ADL Rising. We have a new 5-year plan. It's called ADL Now. So our priorities this year are, again, combating domestic extremism. Secondly, tackling left-wing anti-Semitism, which is an increasing kind of threat. And the third one is protecting our democracy, because I'm so worried about that. When I think about day-to-day on the issues when we show up, we have a heuristic we created called the 3 Ps: principles, priority, and precedent. So when something comes up, a congressman says something, there's an incident in a school district in Tennessee, there's a, whatever the case may be, the first thing is, number one, does this connect with our principles, with that mission? Number 2, priorities. Is this a priority issue? So again, I mentioned our 3 priorities. So like voting rights is something to say, why is that a Jewish concern? Protecting liberal democracy is fundamental, I think, to our preservation as a people and our success as a people in this country, in this moment. So I talk about that, and it maps to my priorities. Someone might say abortion rights. I believe in reproductive freedom. It's not an ADL priority. It matters. It's not an ADL priority. So like when things were happening in Texas around that, we had debates, do we speak out or not? We didn't lead on that because it's not a priority, even if I think it's important. And then thirdly, precedent. Has ADL done this before? It's got to map to our priorities. It's got to fit within our broader strategic plan.
Now, so I think that's incredibly clarifying, and you've got your lanes. What's it like to lead day to day when so much is happening that fits within your three Ps? I
try very hard, Dov, not to focus on a day-to-day basis on strategy or tactics. I focus on people and culture. I mean, there's that Drucker expression, culture eats strategy for breakfast, I think, and it's just true. So I try to more focus on what's the environment we're trying to create? How do we establish these sort of guardrails that people know that they can operate in? And they don't agree with every decision. And I hear from my employees when they don't agree. I hear on Slack, I hear in all hands meetings, people reach out to me, employees, and say, why did you do this? So I have to be accountable to my employees, to my donors, to the public. Know where your lane is and your expertise. Listen to those who have the expertise that you might lack, and have the humility to realize that sometimes the best approach is not to approach it at all. And those questions you ask of yourself are relevant to anybody leading today. I mean, you use your framework to decide subject matter wise what to engage with, but anybody in charge today, anybody leading, has so much coming at them that was once not part of, say, the business agenda
or their organizations that then now comes at them, and they need to ask similar questions, just with a subject matter that connects to it. The process, you're writing this book. What did you better understand and come to understand in writing it?
I think I started working this a couple of years ago, and I had a proposal actually written in 2020. And then January 6th happened, and I literally rewrote the proposal because it seemed like the unraveling was upon us, you know, and I felt the kind of urgency I hadn't before. But the act of writing the book helped me to connect the dots on this, about this work, to really see that through line from like Charlottesville, if I might, to Capitol Hill. And I coined that not because it sounds catchy, but because there's a reality about how hate can corrode a society, almost like, you know, something in your, if you don't change the oil in your car, you know, where is it out? And I think I saw that more clearly as I wrote the book, and could connect the dots about how these things were linked in a way I might not have seen before. This is an all hands on deck effort, right? Like we need a whole of society strategy. ADL can't do it alone. Business can't do it alone. Government, I mean, good luck. So I wrote the book in part because I wanted to kind of lay that out, and I try to. I realize now that people want frameworks, because people want to know what to do. I think the most important question of our time, in many ways, is the simplest question. Now what? Now what? Like, I'm upset. Now what? Like, what do I do? People are, I think all of us have the moral, I think many of us have the moral capacity to lead, but people are looking for leadership. And that doesn't mean they need some, you know, messianic figure, some cult of personality, but that spark that catalyzes them, Dov, I think can be incredibly consequential.
You have explicitly and publicly spoken recently using the phrase moral leadership, and how important it is, particularly from tech purveyors, people who run and control platforms that have permeated our lives. What is your definition of moral leadership? And then I want to engage you on how we cultivate more of it. How do we ensure that it takes the reins, if you will?
So I think about moral leadership as the act. You know, you're not supposed to use a definition in the same word in a definition, but I think about moral leadership as the act of leading with a values-based framework, right? Not based on, you know, shareholders, maybe even based on like stakeholders, which may sound more too ephemeral, but like holding values, you know, and using those core values as the decision filter.
If you go back to first principles, what is your leadership advice to structuring businesses and economic incentives and ways of winning in the marketplace that begin with the right premise? We're serving a full human being, a citizen, not a user and a consumer, because I think it starts with that.
These are deep issues, and I think it certainly does start with language, and it starts with how we envision the world and creating what we want. You know, what is that? It's like do unto others, the golden rule. It's simply that basic. And, you know, Dov, do you remember the reports a few years ago about Silicon Valley executives who wouldn't let their kids use their products?
Sure.
Like, is there ever a bigger like red light that should be going off? Like, if you don't let your kid, your child, the being whom you are responsible for forming, not in a fiduciary way, but again, in a moral way, use the very product that you're pushing, there's something wrong with the product.
So the technology could be a force for good or not. From a leadership standpoint, what is your advice specifically on how those who have the privilege of running powerful platforms, social platforms, to ensure that technology lives up to its promise of being a force for good?
Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. And I think some of these leaders, like I am generally not a fan of libertarianism. And I think because libertarianism diminishes the shared society and the interest we have in a communitarian way of being together to sustain ourselves. Like as individuals, again, it doesn't work. We live in shared societies. So for that reason, I think libertarianism that's at the heart of some of the product decisions and the governing philosophies of companies is deeply damaging. Consider the fact that the companies themselves are built on a platform funded and developed by the US government, literally, right? The internet is that. And then secondly, I think it divorces you from responsibility. And again, a kind of moral values.
In effect, are you calling for Spider-Man ethics that as your power increases and the greater role you play in people's lives, the more responsibility accrues to you? And the innovation that you're so good at, you should innovate in how you take responsibility?
More so. I mean, like with size and with great power comes great responsibility. The most innovative businesses, Dov, in like some of those in the history of the world, shouldn't evade some of the most basic responsibilities that are obvious.
No.
So they're obvious to them as parents, if not as chief executives.
One way we know that somebody is at least attempting to do the right thing or trying to embody moral leadership is they're doing something inconvenient. They're doing something unpopular. They're doing something unprofitable, at least in the short term, or even dangerous.
Yeah.
And we're caught in a trap that for some reason, we happen to be alive at a time where doing the right thing is at minimum inconvenient. How does a moral leader inspire somebody to have the strength to do inconvenient things?
We need to hold up leaders who are willing to challenge that conventional wisdom, even at some degree of personal risk, reputational risk, you know, at some cost. So I don't know that I can do that. Maybe I'm leading by example. I don't know. But I think as a society, we don't yet have the systems.
Right.
I mean, honestly, you're doing that, but we don't have enough people exercising that kind of, lifting the conversation that way and recognize people. We need more of it.
Part of what moral leaders get out of bed to do is to put more truth and trust in the world. And those who put more truth and trust in the world are creating the foundation for a more perfect union and for individuals to pursue their dreams. So I actually think that's what you're doing in many ways, getting out of bed with your 400 colleagues and all the partnerships you have to put more truth and trust in the world, because vibrant democracy and dynamic capitalism and healthy communities and strong and healthy societies rest on the two pillars of truth and trust. And I commend you, and I'm inspired by you and the ADL for putting more truth and trust in the world.
Well, look, it's kind. I so admire what you do and the path you've chosen, and your ability to kind of enable these conversations are really just, they're enlarging for all of us. And I have gratitude for that. I really do, Doug.
Thank you for embracing this conversation. It's been a special one.
And for me as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan.